Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all. For those of you who are just joining us, welcome. And for everyone joining us after the lunch break, welcome back. My name is Stephen Morgan. I'm a research economist here at the USDA's Economic Research Service. And today, this session is going to sort of be a continuation of the theme of our session from earlier in the day. But we're going to feature four more presenters on the topic of diversity and participation in US government programs. Next slide, please. And so again, we're going to have four presenters, Nigel Key, Sarah Atkinson, Kevin Kim, and Katherine Lacy. And so I think Nigel is up first, so I will turn the floor over to you.
Great, thanks, Stephen. Yeah, my name's Nigel Key. I'm an agricultural economist at the USDA Economic Research Service. Just like to recognize my co-authors, Boris Braviaretta, Michelle Lachad, and Eric Njuki, and give the standard disclaimer that what I'm about to talk about is not official USDA or government policy. So as I'm sure most of you know, the USDA Equity Action Plans emphasize improving access to USDA programs for underserved producers. But quantitative information about program access is limited. USDA administrative data only includes information on program participants, not potential participants, which makes it difficult to understand. Makes it difficult to understand how program benefits are distributed across all farms, and it makes it difficult to understand why some farmers do not participate in programs or borrow. So some of the key questions we look at are, what are the differences in program use and borrowing across racial and ethnic groups? What are the reasons for these differences, and what types of programs could reduce these differences? We're going to compare levels of program use for farms operated by socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers with, sorry, I'm just moving something out of the way so I can see my screen here, with farms operated only by non-Hispanic whites. We're going to focus on three main measures of agricultural program use: total payments, acres insured and crop insurance, and total interest expenses. And I'm going to decompose differences and outcomes between the groups into two parts: the part that's explained by observable differences in farm and operator characteristics, and a part that can't be explained by those observable differences. So the results will help identify where program and borrowing gaps are the largest, which is useful information that could help improve program targeting. And the disaggregation can be useful because different types of programs and policies would be needed to reduce explained versus unexplained differences in program use and borrowing. And I'll get into a little bit more on that in a minute. The data for our study is from the 2017 Census of Agriculture, which has the advantage of covering essentially all US farms. And following some of the NAS classification procedures, we're going to create five different groups of farms. The first four are Black or African American, American Indian, Alaska Native, Asian and Hispanic. And those farms are placed into those categories if at least one of the principal producers reports falling into that category. So those are not mutually exclusive categories. And then we're going to compare those groups to farms operated only by non-Hispanic white principal producers. The census provides us with several measures of program use and borrowing. Like I said, I'm going to focus just on the three main measures. Paper, I go into more detail on some of the sub-measures. So the three measures, again, total payments, insured acres, and total interest expenses. And this compares in percentage terms the amounts received by those four different farm groups with the non-Hispanic white farm group. So for total payments, for example, we see that each of those four groups receives about a third the level of non-Hispanic white farms in total payments. Crop insured acres ranges from about 17% to 41% of the non-Hispanic white insured acres. Total interest expenses, there's even more variation, going from about 26 to 178% for the Asian operated farms. Of course, some of this variation is likely explained by the characteristics of the farms and the operators, which vary substantially across the demographic groups. Let me show a few statistics from the census just to illustrate that. This is a little difficult to see, but some of the things, some of what this is showing total sales in each of the different crop categories here. And first of all, it's showing that Asian operated farms are substantially larger than all the other groups, followed by non-Hispanic white and then Hispanics. And that's remember, these are again average levels here. Also, the commodity mixes are different. The Asian and Hispanic operations tend to specialize in fruits and vegetables, whereas the non-Hispanic white farms are concentrated more in corn and soybean production. American Indian operations have cattle as their main specialization. There's also a lot of difference in control of productive assets, including farmland owned and rented. Here we see that Asian operated farms own the most land, followed by non-Hispanic whites. And the non-Hispanic white group rents in the most land. Here we're looking at some market participation measures. That's the use of organic sales and organic products, or participation in direct markets, and also organization in terms of partnership, incorporation, or being organized as an LLC. And actually, in each of these categories, the Asian operated farms have the highest share of operations in each of these types of categories, with other variation across the other groups. And finally, looking at operator characteristics, again, there's substantial differences. The Black or African American operated farms are the least likely to have a young principal operator under 50, and the most likely to have an older senior operator over 70, or to have everybody retired, whereas the American Indian operations are more likely to have all female, all the principal operators being female. So as I mentioned, of course, there's a lot of variation in payments. Some of this could be explained by these variables, just to illustrate how these farm characteristics explain some of the variation in the program use. Got the farms broken into 5 sales categories, with all the farms lumped together on the right there. We saw for all farms, total payments, the non-Hispanic whites received about 3 times the level of the other groups. You can see within the categories, there's less variation. So if you're looking at the 250,000 or more sales category, there's very little difference there between the non-Hispanic whites, Blacks, and American Indians within that sale category, for example. So you can see that clearly these farm characteristics, et cetera, are going to make a difference. So the empirical approach in this study is the Blinder Oaxaca decomposition. What this does is and this is the approach we're using to decompose the differences, the average differences between the groups, into the part that's explained by observables, and the part that's not explained. So we can separately estimate the outcomes Y. So for example, payments or insured acres as a function of observable exogenous variables X. Then the average difference between the groups can be decomposed into 2 parts, shown on the right-hand side of equation 2. That explained difference, or endowment effect, which is the part that's explained by observable differences between the groups. And then the unexplained difference, second term on the right-hand side of equation 2, which is the part attributable to differences in the estimated coefficients. And we don't know why they should have, say, different returns to productive assets. But they do. The estimated coefficients are different, but that's unexplained by what we observe in the explanatory variables. So these are some of the variables that I use in the regression. Point out that I've got 13 levels of sales in 13 different commodity categories and quadratic terms to describe differences in agricultural production, assets, other farm characteristics, including the share of land irrigated, um, organizational structure, the location. We use state fixed effects to pick up local differences in policy and agronomic conditions, and then farming characteristics, age and experience of the operator, gender, and so on. So here is this shows the result of a pooled regression where all of the farms are pooled together in this one regression. And I'm showing this to show how these exogenous variables affect the outcome. In this case, the outcome is total payments. And we can see that total payments are lower for all the different demographic groups, which are enter in the equation as indicator variables here. Payments are increased with the sales of hay, rice, corn, cotton, soybeans, and cattle, but decrease with the sales of fruits and vegetables, milk, hogs, and poultry. They increase with farm assets. They're higher for partnerships and incorporated farms, lower for farms with direct sales. They increase with farming experience, and they're lower if the principal operator is over 70. So this shows the results of one of the decompositions for total payments. It shows the difference in total payments between non-Hispanic whites and Black farms. So we can see here non-Hispanic whites received $4,715 in total payments compared to $1,624 for Black operated farms, a difference of $3,091, of which about $2,000 of that $3,000 difference, about 2/3 was explained by the observable differences in the farms, leaving about 1/3 of the difference, about $1,000 worth of that difference not explained by the observables. So the decomposition allows us to, of that $2,000 that's explained, that $1,997 that's explained, we can disaggregate that into figure out what the different factors are that lead to that. And we can see that the difference is bigger because non-Hispanic white farms produce more in different commodities. They operate more of their own land. They rent in more land. They use more machinery, and they have more experience. And the difference is smaller because non-Hispanic white farms are located in lower payment states. So here I've broken it down for all total payments for all the different groups, and we can see that the difference in the total payments between the non-Hispanic white farms and is similar for all of these different comparisons groups. So the difference of about approximately 2,000. Differences in observables explains about 2/3 of the difference for the Black, American Indian, and Hispanic farms, and about 83% for the Asian farms. For crop acres, the difference in insured acres ranges between 88 and 123 acres, and differences in observables explains 95% and 89% of the difference for Black and Asian farms, only 38 and 57% of the difference for American Indian and Hispanic farms. There's a wide range of difference in terms of interest expenses. Observables explain essentially all of the difference in interest expenses between non-Hispanic white and Black and American Indian farms, and 88% of the difference in Hispanic operated farms. But Asian operated farms have a higher interest expenses than non-Hispanic white farms, and only 41% of the difference is explained. So farms with Black American, so in conclusion, farms with Black, American Indian, Hispanic principal operators have significantly lower average levels of program and credit use than farms with only non-Hispanic white operators. Farmers with Asian principal operators have lower total payments and insured acres, but higher levels of borrowing than farms with only non-Hispanic white principal operators. Differences in observable farm and operator characteristics explain a substantial portion of program use differences. This is particularly true for borrowing, where observable differences explain most of the difference in interest expenses between the groups. However, for some program use measures and some demographic groups, the unexplained differences are large. Reducing the explained and unexplained differences would require different approaches. The explained differences are caused largely by differences in scale, commodity mix, assets, and experience. Examples of programs that would address these differences include FSA loan programs targeted towards socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers, or the Transition Incentives Program. Also, RMA reforms to promote specialty crop insurance would address some of these differences that are explained. On the other hand, unexplained differences are we don't know what causes these unexplained differences. The data does not reveal to us what their cause are, what the causes are. It could be differences in the availability of USDA services, there's different distances to field offices, transportation, and so on. Could be differences in land tenure, like heirs property issues, differences in knowledge or expectations about program benefits, the probability of receiving a loan, and so on. Difference in preferences towards programs, attitudes about wanting to take on debt or participating in programs. Or there could be inequality in program administration, discrimination. We just don't know. We don't know what these unexplained differences are. Could be other factors that I'm not even mentioning here. So analysis such as this can help identify the programs and types of producers and locations where unexplained differences are greatest. But we would need follow-up surveys and studies that would be in order to determine the causes of these unexplained differences, so that programs could be tailored to address the specific barriers that these farmers are facing. A few examples of USDA programs along these lines include the 2501 program that provides technical assistance and outreach to underserved producers, the ERS property relending program, or the RMA Roadshow, which is an outreach program by RMA to promote credit insurance or crop insurance. So let me leave it there. If you're interested in a paper where I go into a lot more detail, please feel free to email me. Thank you. I'll stop sharing now and turn it back to the other presenters.
All right. Thank you, Nigel. I think up next we have Sarah Atkinson.
We do. Let me start my video. Okay. Hello. So today I'm going to talk about USDA Farm Service Agency's loan programs and their mission of providing loans to credit-constrained agricultural producers. Like Nigel said, I am from USDA, and everything I'm sharing, the opinions and viewpoints are my own and not that of USDA or FPAC or FSA. So the Evidence-Based Policy-Making Act of 2018 stressed the importance of periodically evaluating federal programs to ensure that they're reaching their intended recipients. When evaluating those for the FSA farm loan programs, the task is complicated by issues common to most administrative data, which includes lack of data collected or collected sporadically for key measurements needed, lack of access to data on the farm population as a whole versus the program population, and the need to account for external factors impacting the agricultural industry and credit markets that could influence the results that are not included in the administrative data fields. So for this project, we are going to use both ARMS data and FSA data to solve these issues and answer the question, to what degree are FSA farm lending programs meeting the credit needs of U.S. credit-constrained small and mid-sized family farms? Credit-constrained farms can be considered credit-constrained if their private demand for credit exceeds the amount that lenders are willing to loan, is a common definition. First, let's go over FSA's farm lending programs. So FSA, the Farm Service Agency's lending programs, are designed to mitigate the risks of farming by providing loans to qualifying family farms that without this assistance would be unable to access commercial loans at reasonable rates and terms. There are two distinct delivery mechanisms, or two programs. There's the direct loan program and the guaranteed loan program. Direct loans are made and serviced by USDA through FSA staff located in local field offices. So you've probably driven around and seen a local FSA office that they handle the direct loans. Guaranteed loans, on the other hand, are made and serviced by commercial lenders. FSA guarantees the lender against loss between 90 and 95% of principal and interest in the case that the borrower defaults. So for both programs, there's a list of requirements that are spelled out on the website, but among those, the borrower must meet certain criteria, including unable to obtain financial credit from a commercial institution in terms of the direct loan, or unable to obtain credit without the loan guarantee. Within both programs, there's target set-aside funds for beginning farmers and underserved populations, which will be important later as we see the results. While in each program serves a slightly different purpose. The guaranteed loan program primarily addresses credit market failures. As a result, guaranteed loans we see have a greater presence among younger beginning farmers in regions with greater farm financial stress, lower per capita incomes, and fewer agricultural lenders. Direct loans, on the other hand, are more likely to assist underserved farmers having difficulty entering farming or expanding. We see that this program tends to have a greater share of beginning and socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers, veterans, and racial and ethnic minorities. Within each of these loan programs, there's different loan types. The main two are operating loans and farm ownership, operating the expenses to operate a farm operation versus farm ownership generally is farm real estate and other uses. Each of the different loan types has to have different limits, term lengths, and allowable uses. All that information can be found on the FSA website. So for our research here, we're going to use two data sources. We're going to use the ARM survey, which is an annual cross-sectional survey of U.S. farm operators. And we're also going to use FSA Farm Loan Program administrative data. Caveat, while later projects are going to incorporate more of the data elements, for this study, we only use the identifiers to identify farm loan program borrowers. We do not actually use the additional data. Everything else is based upon the ARM survey data. So how do we go about identifying FSA borrowers who were surveyed in the ARM survey? Farm loan program data were first used to generate a list of identifiers for all new and existing borrowers with an outstanding loan balance at the end of each calendar year. We provided this list to NASS, and NASS matched these FLP FSA identifiers with the unique USDA customer identifiers for producers participating in the ARM survey. They provide that list back to us using the ARM survey data sets for the time period between 2013 and 2021, and these matched identifiers. We identified FSA borrowers who participate in the ARM survey by year, and according to Fed, an outstanding direct loan only, guaranteed loan only, or both a direct and guaranteed loan. And regardless of how many outstanding loans or the balances, they're counted once if they had any outstanding loan in that category that year. To measure the differences, we used a metric called market penetration. This is composed of the numerator, which is the sum of borrowers with an outstanding FSA loan across different by category type and loan type, divided by the total number of indebted farms in that category. We used the ARMS farm expansion weights, and we only looked at farms that used credit within a given year, just to make sure the ARMS sample was comparable to our FSA loan borrowers. So using these market penetration rates, we compared FSA market penetration within specific categories to the total FSA market penetration among indebted farms by different loan types. We constructed different comparison categories, and the main goals for these categories were to proxy the distribution of farmers within FSA targeted populations that are believed to be more likely to be credit constrained. That includes beginning farmers, socially disadvantaged farm operations, and small-sized family farms. We also used farm or operator characteristics that past studies or literature have linked with difficulty in obtaining farm credit. And a few of the various categories were also in there because literature or past studies have linked these with FSA targeted populations. And I will go over the different categories used when I get to the results in a second. So here is a list of the literature. I'm not going to spend tons of time, but to point out a couple things. A, market penetration was used before by Noel et al. And Anderson and Hanson et al. Most of the other studies are either by a single period, and very few cover the recent period or a longer time period. And most of them focus on a single loan program or a single category of credit-constrained farmers. So our study is unique in the fact that it has a longer time period, more recent data, and covers a multitude of different credit-constrained categories. Okay, so results. So first, overall, 2% of U.S. farm operators between 2013 and 2021 had some level of outstanding farm debt at the year-end. For that 32%, 14% of them roughly had an outstanding FSA loan, with 86.5% having another type of credit source. That was, and between the loan programs, it's roughly 6.9% with a direct loan, 4.7% with a guaranteed, and 1.9% with both a direct and guaranteed loan. While the share of farms in each category slightly adjust each year, overall it's fairly constant. Generally, between the time period, the market penetration for direct farms has been between 8 and 10%, and for guaranteed farms between 6 and 8%. So let's look at our categories. The first one we do is farm size. This is based on 3 items. First is the occupation of the principal operator. Second is if it's a family farm or not, and then if it's a family farm, on the farm income level. So those where farming was not the primary occupation are classified as part-time farms. Those that are not family farms are non-family farms. And for the family farms, it's broken based upon gross cash farm income. And this category is based upon the ARMS data and categories within the ARMS data set. So I'm going to spend a second going over how to interpret these graphs, so it'll be much easier moving forward. So on the very far right hand, we see the market penetration of FSA loans among all farms of debt, and then this is broken down between the different categories. On the very bottom is the market penetration for direct loans. And then above that is the market penetration for guaranteed loans. And then non-listed is the both, which can be provided if you desire, but the data gets fairly thin up in that area. So we see here that FSA direct loans have a relatively greater market penetration among the category of small family and mid-sized family farms. We look at 7.1% among small family and 9.8% among mid-sized family farms versus 6.9% among the total in-debt farm population. One way to interpret this is to think that of all small family farms having debt at year-end, 7.1% of them had a direct FSA loan. FSA guaranteed loans, on the other hand, target a slightly, or have a greater penetration among slightly larger family farm size. The mid-sized family farm and large-size family farm with market penetrations at 6.3% and 10.5% compared to their overall market penetration of 4.7%. We also looked at beginning farmer. Beginning farmers are believed to have a difficulter time obtaining credit due to shorter time farming and lack of credit or less credit history. So a beginning farmer is identified as a farmer who's not operated a ranch or a farm for more than 10 years. We further split this based upon if there was a single operator versus multiple operators. And for the single operator, where the single operator was a beginning farmer, those earning less than $100,000 in gross cash farm income were classified as small single beginning farmer operators, and those with greater than $100,000 were classified as large beginning single farmer operators. For the multiple operators, we split those into two categories. Those are multi-generational versus non-multi-generational. The multi-generational was our attempt to proxy the passing on of the farm between different generations, which is an important issue. Now, the ARMS does not identify family relationships, so we use the measure of the difference in the age between the different operators. So as long as there were 20 or more years between any of the operators, they're classified as a multi-generational farm. If that didn't apply, they were a non-multi-generational farm. And the ARMS survey, I should note, provides information on one primary operator as well as 3 additional operators. We see that the direct loans have a large market penetration among single beginning farmer operators at 9.8 for small and 16.1 for large single beginning farmer operators. Guaranteed loans, on the other hand, have a large market penetration among the large beginning farmer single operator as well as this multi-generational beginning farmer category. We also construct a credit classification rating. This is the author's construction. It is not an official credit score. It is not used by FSA as an official credit score. So this is not a credit score. This is basically our way to proxy the farm's ability to potentially obtain commercial credit based solely on their financial data. So it's constructed as a weighted average of 4 financial ratios. These are ratios typically used by commercial banks. And then the data from that comes completely from the ARMS survey. So the 4 ratios are the asset to debt ratio, the return on assets, the current ratio, and the term debt coverage ratio. The overall score ranges between 1 and 4. The lower the number, the stronger the farm's underlying financial ratios, and the more likely they would be able to qualify for a commercial loan. So what we're calling commercial, a score of 2.0 or below, indicates the highest ability to qualify for commercial credit. And then the ability goes downward from high standard, low standard, and least likely is the marginal acceptable category at 3.0 and above. We see that guaranteed loans have a very large market penetration among those just barely unable to qualify for commercial credit. If this is the commercial, the most likely, this is those in the 2.0 to 2.49 range, just unable to, barely there. Direct loans have a larger market penetration on those that are less likely to be able to qualify for commercial credit based solely on their financial ratios. Another category we looked at is socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers, and I can thank Nigel, who did a great job of introducing this category to me, or for me. So, socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers, a farmer or rancher's members have been subject to racial or ethnic prejudice because of their identity as a member of a group without regard to individual qualities. That is the official definition. The operational definition for FSA loans is operations where at least one operator is either part of a non-white racial or ethnic group and or a woman. So in our measurement, we broke into two smaller subcategories. I get socially disadvantaged racial category. So that includes operations where any of the operators classifies either as a non-white race, Black or African American, American Indian or Native American, Asian, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, or Hispanic ethnicity. I also create a socially disadvantaged gender category. For this, we look only at the gender of the primary operator, and this is any operations where the female identifies, or the primary operator identifies as female. And the overall socially disadvantaged farmer rancher category here is operations that fall either in the socially disadvantaged racial or socially disadvantaged gender category. We see that direct loans have a very significant market penetration among racial and ethnic minorities. They're 18.3% among this category versus their overall 6.9% among indebted farms. We also look at the age of the primary operator. Younger operators might have a more difficulty obtaining credit. So we used the variable in arms for the age of the primary operator and split it into 5 different categories. We find that direct loans have a relatively greater market penetration among the youngest farms, those under 35 years old. Guaranteed loans, on the other hand, have a greater penetration among just a slightly older but still younger operators, the 35 to 44-year-old range. Okay. In the paper I wrote, and I'm currently gathering other categories, but this is the last category I want to cover today. So I call this the other. This is other indications that the farm might have difficulty obtaining credit or might be in a region indicating that. So we looked at limited resource farms, and this is all these are variables within the ARMS data. So limited resources are operations where the household income, both farm and off-farm, falls below the U.S. poverty guidelines for families 4, or is less than half the median county household level, and the farm gross sales were less than the amount set by NAS for limited resource farms over 2 years. We also looked at those farms located in persistent poverty counties. What is the FSA penetration in those counties? And those are counties with the poverty rate of 20% or higher that has persisted for 30 years or more. We also look at, does FSA have a larger market penetration in counties with a significant number of racial minorities? So that includes counties where 25% or more of the population in the census identified as either Black, Native American, or Hispanic. And finally, we look at the FSA's market penetration in farming-dependent counties that obtain a large portion of their farming income from farming. We see that direct loans have a fairly high market penetration among limited resource farms, those in persistent poverty counties, and those with 25% or more of the population identifying as Native American or Black. So the main takeaway is, according to our measures of credit constraint, FSA loan programs appear to be reaching a wide variety of these credit constrained farms, as well as they appear to be reaching those populations that have been emphasized. But they actually serve a similar but a slightly different audience. The direct loans have a greater market penetration, presence among small and mid-sized family farms, beginning farmers and young farmers, and racial and ethnic minority operators, while guaranteed loans have a larger penetration among mid-sized and large-sized family farms, large or multi-generational beginning farmers, and those falling just short of commercial credit readiness. This has been the initial step of some research. So we continue to look at some other categories here and potentially other ways we can take this research forward. But yes, thank you for listening, and I welcome any questions later. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Sarah. So next up, we have Kevin Kim.
All right. So, well, thanks for having me. My name is Kevin Kim. I'm an assistant professor at Mississippi State University. And the study that I'm going to present is titled like this: Are U.S. government programs reaching minority farmers? Evidence from the Paycheck Protection Program approval rates. And this work is being in with Dr. Anna Claudia Santana from West Virginia University and Dr. Irina Demko at Progressive Insurance. So I'm not going to too much detail about the social inequities or challenges faced by minority farmers at this point, because we've been talking about this issue being a significant concern for minority producers, whether the definition is based on gender-based or racial-based. So the US government, including the USDA, of course, have acknowledged this sort of challenges faced by minority producers. So there has been a lot of different programs and reforms introduced specifically targeting these minority producers. But at the same time, still a lot of money is still allocated to government programs that target a broad scope of agricultural producers, and sometimes this might not be communicated well with minority producers. And recently, Rosa et al. Conducted a survey with African American farmers and ranchers in Mississippi. The sample size was pretty close to 100. And they basically asked, what are the challenges that these farmers face in assessing the program? And it was documented that there was a lot of communication issue and the introduction about different government programs. So simply speaking, despite the presence of many good programs, it was found that minority producers simply did not know about those programs or had a hard time assessing those programs. So for this study, we sort of broadly asked whether we observe a lower program participation for counties with higher representation of minority agribusiness owners. So for this study, we look at the Paycheck Protection Program. So the Paycheck Protection Program was introduced in reaction to COVID-19, as small business owners suffered greatly in the early stage of COVID-19. So this program was eventually administered by the Small Business Administration, or the SBA. So what small business owners could do was that if they met the eligibility criteria, then they could obtain the PPP loan by filing an application with participating lending institutions, which included commercial banks, credit unions, and farm credit system, as well as fintech companies. Then the SBA provided loan guarantees for these participating lenders. But in turn, these participating lending institutions also received some fee from the SBA. So this sort of gave the lending institutions some incentive to disseminate the information about this particular program. Then what's the eligibility criteria for getting this PPP loan? So in 2020, the two criteria basically was that the business had to have less than 500 or fewer employees, and they had to have some sort of tax filing document in the previous year. So this is where this particular program really draws a distinction from other programs, including some of the FSA programs. It is because there was no credit checking, or they did not really ask for the repayment history of the loan applicant. Some of the demographic information in filing this application was also voluntary. So disclosure of gender and race was voluntary for this program too. What this program made attractive was that the loan interest rate was fixed at 1%. And not only that, full loan forgiveness was granted to those who obtained the number of employees and or spent more than 60% of the loan proceeds on payroll costs. So what eventually happened was that the SBA ended up spending nearly $900 billion through this program. And in fact, agricultural producers were also eligible for this program, but we will eventually see that many ag business owners did not know they were eligible for this particular program. So we consider this PPP as a universal program because of the lack of credit score checking and low bar for filing the application and extremely low cost assistance program, making this particular program, the participation barrier for the program to be minimal. Now, there have been multiple studies conducted on looking at this particular, looking at the PPP program and agribusiness owners. So Giri et al. From USDA-ERS have already shown that the participation rate for the PPP program was lower than CFAP administered by the USDA. And it was also documented that agribusiness owners received smaller loan amount than what they could have received. Now, this study is a third study that I've been working on with the same co-authors. Our first study on this subject area have shown that the African-American producers received less PPP amount per employee basis. Our second study, which we expect to be published pretty soon, what we did for the second study was that we went out and interviewed female producers and African-American producers and asked them what kind of challenges that they faced with respect to the PPP program. And the interview results basically indicated that there was a lot of misinformation and barrier to the information. So this encouraged us to look at a broader scope of participation rate for this program, which will be the main question for this study. So our primary data is the PPP loan data obtained from the SBA. SBA discloses all the loan issuance data on their website. So we examined the PPP loans received in 2020 and 2021, but limit our study to recipients with North American Industry Classification Code of 11. Thus, limiting our sample to general agribusiness. So what we could get from this database was the industry classification code, as well as the location data and loan amounts, as well as the number of employees. Other informations were pretty much voluntary. So race and gender data, again, was voluntary, and there was a very high non-response rate for these information. Our study eventually looked at the county level characteristics. So in order to control for different county level characteristics, we gathered county demographic data from 2017 Ag Census, as well as USDA-ERS scorecard crossbreed now for obtaining the inequality measure and Kimmel-Waldorf for rural versus urban index. And one variable that we also looked at was the lending institution location data. It is because, again, lending institutions has incentive to disseminate information about the PPP loan program because they receive some fee from the SBA. One of the interviewees from our previous study also indicated that, so this was a farmer, he did not know he would be eligible for the PPP program, but it was his banker who actually told him that he should be eligible for the PPP loan program. That's why we wanted to look at the role of lending institutions. So we eventually examined the commercial banks, farm credit system, and credit union presence on a county level. So here's the map of PPP recipients in 2021. So what we can see from this map is that there were a lot of PPP recipients in the Midwest region. So the counties with white color is actually the counties with at least one through 35 ag producer recipients, and the color gray are the counties that have 0 recipients. So as we can see, most counties received there were at least one PPP recipients, but we can see it is more centered around the Midwestern region. So when we look at a state level, so table here shows the percentage of PPP participants relative to the total number of farms on a state level. So in year 2020, about 7% of ag producers participated in the program. 2021, with more information dissemination with this program, the number increased to 20%. Now, when we look at 2021, one of the states, 83% of ag producers in the state received PPP loan, while one of the states, only 0.3% of ag producers received the PPP loan. So this was another indication that there was a huge room for higher participation or improvement, but still there was a great variance across the states. When we look at the individual recipients' data, so on the left-hand side, we have the PPP recipients for female-owned business and African-American-owned business. And the percentages here in the bracket terms represent the share of PPP recipients or primary operator that are African-American or female over those who answered their gender and or race, okay? So about 12.46% of the recipients were female-owned business, and about 3% were African-American owned business. Comparing that to 2017 Ag Census number, we have an underrepresentation of female producers, but not necessarily the case for the African-American producers. But here's the caveat. So I just mentioned that this number is based on the percentage of those who disclose their gender and race information, right? However, the non-response rate for gender and race were 65% and 75% respectively, meaning that more than half of the PPP recipients did not disclose their demographic information for these two categories. So this poses as a very significant problem with respect to the PPP data set, which has been addressed in many of the previous studies. And because of that, we are not going to really rely on this demographic information for our study. So here is the baseline regression model for our study. So on the left-hand side, what we had was we counted the number of PPP recipients on a county level, okay? On the right-hand side, the two main variables of interest were the female share and non-white share. So the female share was the percentage of female primary producers relative to the total number of farms in operation in County I, and non-white share will be the share or the percentage of non-white primary producers on a county, okay? Another variable of interest will be the number of lenders per county, which will be the number of lending institutions, whether it's farm credit, commercial banks, or credit unions on a county level. On the right-hand side, we also had a series of county level characteristics as control variables, including number of farms, average farm value, average farm income level, average government payment level, percentage of lack of internet access, less than high school education attainment, income inequality, rural versus urban index. So our main results will be based on the negative binomial test, but we did run different tests, including the goodness of fit and Vaughn test, to see whether the Poisson or the zero inflated models will suit better, but eventually the conclusion had to be that negative binomial should be the most preferred model for this study. Here are some descriptive statistics for the sample. So on average, there were about 166 ag PPP recipients on a county level. Female share per county level was 20%, non-white share of 4.2%. Average number of lenders was about 35 different lenders per county level. And due to the time constraint, I'm gonna sort of skip over the rest of the variables. And here are the main results. So again, we ran the negative binomial model where we counted the number of PPP recipients on a county. So the coefficients for the female share and the non-white share were all statistically significant and negative, meaning that if there were more female producers or non-white producers for the county, then the number of PPP recipients on those counties were lower. Lending institutions, not surprisingly, had positive coefficients and they were statistically significant. The one with the highest magnitude was the rurality index. So this was a 0 to 1 scale, 1 being equal to most rural area. So if a county had more urban area or close to urban area, then those counties received more PPP and had more PPP recipients. So this was a county level analysis for year 2020. For 2021, the results were qualitatively the same, where we had statistically and negative coefficients for female share and non-white share. So in summary, both 2020 and 2021, we observed that counties with higher percentage of minority farmers had lower PPP participant number, and counties with more agricultural lenders or lending institutions had higher number of PPP recipients. We also use some alternative measures, such as number of lenders per 1,000 population, And qualitatively speaking, it also had positive and significant coefficient. In unreported tests, as a robustness check, we conducted Poisson, zero-inflated Poisson, zero-inflated negative binomial test. And again, qualitatively and quantitatively speaking, we did not observe significant difference among the results. So our primary results suggest that participation rates with counties with higher level of minority agribusiness owners are indeed lower. And that's not surprising because our previous interviews already show that there was an information barrier faced by these minority farmers, which was also consistent with, again, Russell et al. 2021. And this sort of encourages us to think about how the future government programs should consider in disseminating the information and effectiveness of those communication tools. Some of the future steps that we are trying to take for this study is we are trying to construct some kind of diversity index for a county because we were told about these social cohesive and non-cohesive communities having a different information flow barrier and smoothness of information flow among the communities. So we are trying to look into those diversity index or measures to see whether the social counties with higher level of social cohesion exhibit higher level of participation rate or not, which will then have some different implication for policymakers too. So that concludes the study. So thank you. And I will take any questions after all the presentations are finished. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Kevin. I now will transition to our final presentation of this session, which is Katherine Lacy.
I'm Katherine Lacy. I'm a research agricultural economist with the USDA Economic Research Service. Today, I'm going to be presenting work for a project with Katherine Lim, who is also a research agricultural economist with ERS. And before I get started, I would like to say that the findings and conclusions in this presentation are those of mine and Katherine's and should not be construed to represent any official USDA or US government determination or policy. Now, today I'm going to be talking to you about identifying historically underserved farm operations, also known as socially disadvantaged farm operations, and the role of non-responses in survey data. Now, when I talk about historically underserved or socially disadvantaged farm operations, I'm referring to the definition on race and ethnicity. And I know there's a lot of other definitions out there, but we're just going to be focusing on race and ethnicity in this presentation. Now, there's been a lot of recent literature that has explored the variability in farm characteristics and program participation across different races and ethnicities of farm operators. Recently, ERS has published 2 reports that look at summary statistics by different race and ethnicity groups. The Todd and Others report also looks at female-owned operations as well as veteran operations and limited resource operations. But there are other studies that look at government payments by different race and ethnicity groups, as well as credit usage, tax benefits, crop insurance, and financial performance of the farm operation and farm households. While all of these studies look at different outcomes, they also have different methods of taking farm operator race and ethnicity information to an entire farm operation definition. And that's what we're going to be exploring today in this presentation. But before I get into the definitions or any results, I want to talk about how we actually collect race and ethnicity data. So we currently have a 2-question format. First, we ask about ethnicity, specifically, are you Hispanic or Latino? And the respondents can select yes or no. And then we ask about race. There's 5 options, and they can select more or more than one. This 2-question format was updated in 1997, and we expect that there may be future updates to this race question. Now, throughout the rest of the presentation, I'm going to be using data from the Agricultural Resource Management Survey, also called ARMS. This is an annual survey of producers, and it's our primary source of information on production practices, resource use, and economic well-being of producers. To ensure there's a large enough sample of socially disadvantaged producers, we're going to be pooling years 2017 through 2022. Now, in the ARMS, we asked demographic information on up to 4 producers per operation. For each person, we ask about ethnicity. Specifically, is the person Hispanic, Latino, or Spanish origin? Then we ask about race, where they're provided with those 5 race groups, and they can select one or more than one option. Again, we're going to define socially disadvantaged based on Hispanic ethnicity or a non-white race. Now, there's a lot of complications with defining the socially disadvantaged status of a farm operation because we're trying to take information on up to 4 producers and turn it into an operation level definition. And there's a few common definitions that are found in the literature. One way is by using mutually exclusive categories where one operation cannot be in multiple race and ethnicity categories. Another way is by grouping all socially disadvantaged race and ethnicity categories together. So you're comparing socially disadvantaged operations to non-socially disadvantaged operations. This is common when we have small sample sizes of our socially disadvantaged producers, but also if we look at programs or policies, we often see the discussion of socially disadvantaged versus not socially disadvantaged in this group definition format. Another type of definition is non-mutually exclusive categories, where a farm operation can appear in multiple different race and ethnicity groups. This is how the Census of Agriculture reports statistics on producers. So when studies that use Census of Agriculture data might be more likely to use that definition. Another definition, which we don't really explore in this study, is defining the farm operation based on the principal operator race and ethnicity. What I didn't show you in the previous slide is in ARMS, we ask which person is most responsible for the farm level decisions, and that's how you'd get to a principal operator definition. In the most recent Census of Agriculture, they've gone away from this question. So if studies are using the most recent Census of Agriculture data, they will not be able to actually use this 4th definition. So with that being said, I want to get into the definitions that we are going to explore in this presentation. First, we're going to define 6 mutually exclusive categories as our first definition. And the order in which I present these categories is going to be important because first we're going to define the Hispanic category. And if at least one operator is Hispanic, the operation is going to be labeled as a Hispanic operation. Then for the remaining operations, we'll define the non-Hispanic Black operations. So if at least one operator is non-Hispanic Black, that will be considered a non-Hispanic Black operation. We'll follow the same format for Asian and American Indian or Alaskan Native operations. And then we'll have a non-Hispanic Other category. Non-Hispanic Other is going to include operators who identify as more than one race, as well as operations that have operators of different races. And it's also going to include operators who identify as Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander. What I didn't mention earlier is ARMS surveys producers in the contiguous 48 states. So we have very few operators who identify as Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander in our sample, in our data. So that is why they end up in the non-Hispanic Other category. Lastly, we are going to define a 6th category, which is all operators are non-Hispanic White. And this will remain the same definition for the same category for the next 2 definitions. For definition 2, we're going to have all operators are non-Hispanic White as one category. And then we're going to have a group of all socially disadvantaged operators. And that will be at least one operator is socially disadvantaged race or ethnicity. For definition 3, we'll define 3 mutually exclusive categories where we'll have all operators who identify as Hispanic or a socially disadvantaged race. Then our next group is at least one operator is a socially disadvantaged race or ethnicity, and at least one operator is white. And then we'll have our third group, which is all operators are non-Hispanic white. The idea behind this third definition, if we're thinking of government payment participation or credit usage, we might see differences if there's at least one white operator on the farm. And our 4th definition is our 6 non-mutually exclusive categories where at least one producer identifies as one of the 6 race or ethnicity categories, and one farm operation can appear in multiple categories. So now that we have our definitions, I want to look at the proportion of operations in each category by our definition. As I mentioned, all operators are non-Hispanic white should be the same in definitions 1, 2, and 3. And we see 91% of our operations are all operators are non-Hispanic white. If we focus on definition 2 first, we see 8.7% of our operations have at least one operator that identifies as a socially disadvantaged race or ethnicity. Definition 1 breaks these out into our different socially disadvantaged race and ethnicity categories. And we see 4.3% of our operations are Hispanic, 2.1% are American Indian or Alaskan Native, 1.3% are Black or African American, 0.6% are Asian, and 0.2% are non-Hispanic other. We can look at definition 3, and we see 6.1% of our operations have all operators that identify as a socially disadvantaged race or ethnicity. We see that 2.6% of our operations have at least one operator that is non-Hispanic white, and at least one operator that identifies as a socially disadvantaged race or ethnicity. Now, this category, the 2.6% of operations, is going to be important when we're comparing definition 1 to definition 4. Definition 4 is going to be our non-mutually exclusive category, where a farm operation can appear in multiple race or ethnicity groups. So for those 2.6% of the observations, 2.6% of operations in definition 1, they would appear in one of our socially disadvantaged race or ethnicity categories, or in definition 4, those will appear in non-Hispanic white, as well as the socially disadvantaged race or ethnicity that that operator identifies as. So if we move to definition 4, we see 94% of our operations are non-Hispanic white. In our sample, about 0.5% of our observations appear in more than one socially disadvantaged race or ethnicity group. So we're not seeing a lot of overlap of our operations when it comes to our non-mutually exclusive categories. Most of the double count, if you want to consider double counting, would be with a socially disadvantaged race as well as the non-Hispanic white operations. So now that we looked at our proportions, I want to start getting into some results. And for the results, we're going to be looking at the participation in government programs, participation in crop insurance, and whether the operation reported having an agricultural loan. We're going to look at this by our different race and ethnicity definitions. Specifically, we're going to present simple OLS results without any controls, and our significance tests are going just to be mean difference or proportion difference, depending on the dependent variable. So if we first look at our first set of results, the probability of receiving government payments, and we take a look at definition 1, we see that Hispanic, non-Hispanic Black, non-Hispanic American Indian, and non-Hispanic Asian operations are less likely to receive government payments compared to non-Hispanic white operations. Now, this could be due to differences in specialization or differences in size, but as I said earlier, we're not trying to get at the why for this presentation. We want to just compare definitions. So if we compare definitions 1 to 4, we see our results do not change much. The coefficients are relatively similar, the significance is similar, and we see Hispanic, Black, American Indian, and Asian coefficients are negative and statistically significant. So we're just comparing our mutually exclusive to non-mutually exclusive categories. Now for definition 2, we merge all of the socially disadvantaged race and ethnicity categories into one category. And since we see similarities across our socially disadvantaged race and ethnicity groups, our coefficient on definition 2 is negative and significant. So we're seeing consistent results as we go from definition 1 to definition 2, and same with definition 3. So we see negative and significant coefficients on both all socially disadvantaged operations, as well as the operations that have both a socially disadvantaged and a non-Hispanic white operator. Now, in addition to looking at the probability of receiving government payments, we want to also look at our average government payments. Now, these results are the conditional average. So it's the average government payments for farms that report receiving payments. So those who do not receive payments are not included within these regressions. When we're comparing definitions 1 and 4, again, we see consistent results. But if we're looking at definitions 1 and 4 a little bit more closely, we see a positive significant coefficient on our Hispanic race and ethnicity and Hispanic operated farms, and we see negative significant coefficients on our Black operated farms and American Indian operated farms. Because of these differences across our socially disadvantaged race and ethnicity groups, we're seeing kind of a washout or a masking effect when it comes to merging our socially disadvantaged groups in definitions 2 and 3. So if we're looking at the coefficient on definition 2, it looks like there's no differences between our socially disadvantaged operations and our non-Hispanic white operations. And same with definition 3. Now, if we go into looking at the probability of participating in federal crop insurance, we see our results are very similar to the probability of participating in government programs or receiving a government payment. We see consistent results between definitions 1 and 4, and similarities across our socially disadvantaged groups means that definitions 2 and 3 don't have this masking effect, but instead we have consistent results in definitions 2 and 3 with negative significant coefficients. And again, we're going to see similar results when it comes to the probability of reporting a farm loan. Again, we have consistency amongst definitions 1 and 4, mutually exclusive versus non-mutually exclusive, and similarities among our socially disadvantaged farm operations results in consistent results for definition 2. We do have a slight difference when it comes to definition 3, where we see that farm operations with all socially disadvantaged operators are less likely to report holding a farm loan than non-Hispanic white operations, but we don't see a significant difference between our non-Hispanic white operations and those that have both a socially disadvantaged producer and a white producer. Just like with government payments, we want to look at average loan balances. Specifically, we're going to be looking at the conditional average. So we're only looking at the average loan balance for farms that hold a farm loan or report holding a farm loan. Again, we have consistent results from definitions 1 to 4. We have consistent results within definitions 1 and definitions 4, but because of differences among our socially disadvantaged race and ethnicity groups, we see a masking effect when it comes to merging all of those socially disadvantaged groups in definitions 2 and 3. So to summarize our regression results, we see using definitions with a breakout of different race and ethnicity groups, such as definitions 1 and 4, are important when there are differing results among socially disadvantaged farm operations. But it looks like using mutually exclusive versus non-mutually exclusive definitions has little impact on the significant differences. Now, we do have some preliminary results when, for these regressions, we decided to control for basic farm operation characteristics such as specialization, size, production region, and our results remain consistent. But instead of presenting those results, I want to spend the rest of my time talking about missing race and ethnicity data within our survey responses. For this, I'm going to focus on year 2022 in ARMS, and that's because the 2022 ARMS included a targeted sample of socially disadvantaged farm operations, so we would have a large enough sample to look at the breakout of different race and ethnicity groups. Another unique aspect of 2022 was this was a census of agriculture year. For the census of agriculture, or for respondents, they could respond to either ARMS or the census of agriculture. It was the same survey and it counted as a response. And during census years, the National Agricultural Statistics Service, known as NASS, who conducts the census of ag, as well as ARMS, works to minimize the amount of missing information. What I mean by that is with respect to race, NASS staff were able to replace missing producer race and ethnicity information with previous survey responses from the same producer. So if, for example, I received the ARMS survey and I did not fill out my race and ethnicity information, but I completed the previous census and I did include my race and ethnicity information, NASS was able to look back at my previous response and fill in my 2022 ARMS race and ethnicity information. Because of this work by NASS, In 2022, only 0.6% of our sample had missing race and ethnicity information. If we look at the average missing responses from 2017 to 2021, it was about 7.5% of our sample that had missing race and ethnicity information. So what we do next is we break our sample into different groups. We're going to look at a sample of those who reported their race and ethnicity data, and we're going to look at the sample who did not report their race and ethnicity data, but NAS actually had their race and ethnicity data. So what I mean by imputations on this slide, that just means that NAS was able to fill in that missing information. So we had about 2,206 observations that had missing information that NAS was able to complete because they had that data from other surveys. Now, for these statistics, we're looking at our unweighted sample. So all of my previous statistics, we were weighting our observations. So it was representative of all US farming. This, we just want to focus on the sample. So we're looking at unweighted statistics, which is why it might look a little bit different than the proportions previously presented. Now, if we look at the sample with reported race data, 85% of that sample reported being non-Hispanic white, and 15% of that sample reported being of a socially disadvantaged race or ethnicity. Now, if we look at the sample that did not report race, but we actually had the race and ethnicity information, 75% are non-Hispanic white, and 25% are of a socially disadvantaged race or ethnicity. So this provides some suggestive evidence that our missing race information does not follow the same distribution as the reported race information, which brings us to our next steps. So one of our next steps is to further explore the impact of that missing race and ethnicity data. If we go back to our regression results, some things that we want to look at is how do our results differ if we define our socially disadvantaged status using the principal producer, or maybe by including the spouse, race, and ethnicity information. So with that, I'll stop there. If you have any questions, you're more than welcome to send me an email. If you don't get to ask them today, the QR code takes you to my directory link, which also has my email address. If you're interested in any of the studies I discussed, there's a citation list at the back, but I will go back to my directory link and I will bring it back to Stephen.
All right. Thank you, Katherine. That was fantastic. So the question and answer portion has been pretty quiet. If anybody has anything that they want to get in the chat, please feel free. I think one question for sort of all of the speakers and panelists might be, how do your results and how does your study help us think about farms and farmers who might fall into different categories, right? So, maybe it's a woman who's Black, maybe a beginning farmer. How should we, think about those different effects that you might capture in your study as it applies to individuals in these different groups? I guess to make it a little broader or to focus on the methods, is there a need or are there data needs? Is it important to think about adding more groups to some of these studies? How do we think about capturing some of those effects? Or are they additive? Just how should we think about the results?
I think there's a lot of silence, Stephen, because that's difficult to answer. I think there is going to be, I think as we go forward, you will see more producers checking multiple boxes, perhaps, for recognizing their different heritage that they have. And so it's something that we as researchers are going to have to deal with. Obviously, one way to do it is sort of what Katherine did, was create another box, but that's kind of unsatisfying too. But yeah, that's the other challenge we run into is you start dividing groups. So we want to look at female African American producers. You end up, female African producers who are principal operators. You're getting into really small numbers of farms, which surveys have a really difficult time collecting statistically useful information, reliable information on those. The census is a little bit better, but that's only every 5 years. It's limited in the information it collects. So these are definitely challenges we have. I don't know if anybody else wants to chime in with some thoughts.
I guess I would fully agree with what Nigel said. It would be nice to look at more groups, or like if you're breaking up gender and race and ethnicity and having different groups based on all of those. But it does get very challenging when it comes to sample size. Even just breaking out race and ethnicity can be very challenging, especially with our sample sizes for our ARM survey. We're able to do it when we did the targeted sample, but for all other years, we have to actually pool those years together to have a large enough sample size.
Yeah, I would definitely echo Nigel and echo everybody that spoke thus far. I mean, when you get into small sizes, you just get into issues of reporting disclosure, which is hard. And you also get into the fact that you're looking at a population that might be very key, but that's got 5 individuals. What part of that is really due to their being part of that population versus their individual characteristics that larger sample sizes can slightly even out. And also it'd be nice to capture different information, but at some point you get to 50 to 60 page surveys, and we already suffer from survey fatigue. So there's the trade-off between the amount of information we can get and the amount that people are going to give. And looking at a lot of these groups as well, I was thinking there's also the element of how do we reach effectively? Kind of going back to Kevin's study, et cetera. I mean, how do you reach? Because maybe the ARMS survey format is not the best for certain groups, certain non-English, even reading-speaking groups. So how do you reach them? How do you get the on-the-ground support and different methods? And how do you basically get data that's available out there to incorporate and just make best use of that? So those are all issues as well. But just this whole looking at how everybody addressed different issues reminds me just how many different issues there are within the same categories we're talking about, how many different ways you can look at it and slice it and kind of examine it, and all the research that still needs to get done.
Great. Well, I think that brings us to the end of our allotted time. So thanks again to all of the presenters and speakers. And I hope everyone will join us for our next session, which starts in about 5 minutes. So you can navigate there in the event hub. But thank you all.